Hello and welcome to my channel, and welcome to a Sunday morning meetup in which I discuss 10 British novels from the 1940s. The 10 novels I've picked represent each year from 1940 to 1949. Book number 1 was published in the year 1940. Verdict of 12 is a novel by Raymond Postgate, first published in 1940 about a trial by jury seen through the eyes of each of the 12 jurors as they listen to the evidence and try to reach a unanimous verdict of either guilty or not guilty. Verdict of 12 is set in England in the late 1930s. Hitler, Nazism and in particular anti-Semitism are referred to several times. This story reminds me of the 1957 film 12 Angry Men, starring Henry Fonda and Lee J. Cobb, but it was not based on this novel. At least it wasn't credited by the screenwriter Reginald Rose, to whom the story is credited as being from an original teleplay written by him. So rather than telling you anything about the actual crime or story of Verdict of 12, I'm going to tell you about the 10 men and 2 women who have been picked randomly to do jury service. They are an unmarried middle-aged journalist, a young left-wing intellectual newly married and happy, a hard-working and honest publican, a travelling salesman unsuccessfully trying to flog encyclopedias, a young attractive widow of Jewish descent whose husband was killed when he was attacked in the street by hooligans, a young hairdresser sharing a house with 3 workmates, an old fat homosexual university don specialising in the reconstruction of classical texts, a young actor who has not quite found his personal style, a restaurateur who successfully poses as an Englishman although he was born and raised a pauper in Greece, a religious fanatic who believes he belongs to the chosen few, a busy trade union official, and ironically a murderess who has got away with her crime and who has been leading an inconspicuous and solitary life ever since. Up to the final pages of the novel, till after the trial is over, the reader does not know if the defendant, a middle-aged woman charged with murder, is innocent or not. To find out, you have to read the novel. I was so curious about this novel that I've reserved it at my local library, so expect a review later in the month. Other British novels published in 1940 include The Power and the Glory by Graham Greene, Pigeon Pie by Nancy Mitford, 1, 2, Buckle My Shoe by Agatha Christie, and Fanny by Gaslight by Michael Sadlier. Book number 2 was published in 1941. Up at the Villa is a novella by W. Somerset Maugham about a young widow caught among 3 men, her suitor, her one-night stand, and her confidant. A fast-paced story, Up at the Villa incorporates elements of the crime and suspense novel. The action takes place in the late 1930s. 30-year-old Mary Panton, whose extraordinary beauty has always been one of her greatest assets, has been a widow for 1 year. Her late husband Matthew, whom she married at 21 because she loved him, turned out to be an alcoholic, a gambler, a womanizer and a wife beater. Mary endures all the hardship and pain inflicted on her by her husband, including his having sex with her while drunk. When he drinks and drives, he has a car accident. A few hours later, he dies in Mary's arms. This, she concludes, is a blessing for both of them. Thus the action begins, and to find out what happens next, you'll need to read the story. Other British novels published in 1941 include Random Harvest by James Hilton. The Screwtape Letters is a Christian apologetic novel by C.S. Lewis. Between the Acts is the final novel by Virginia Woolf. It was published shortly after her death in 1941. And Evil Under the Sun by Agatha Christie. Book number 3 was published in 1942. Put Out More Flags was the 6th novel by Evelyn Waugh. The title of the novel comes from the saying of an anonymous Chinese sage, quoted and translated by Lin Yutang in The Importance of Living. Put Out More Flags is dedicated to Randolph Churchill, the son of the more famous Winston, who found a service commission for war during the Second World War. The novel is set during the first year of the war and follows the wartime activities of characters introduced in Waugh's earlier satirical novels Decline and Fall, Vile Bodies and Black Mischief. The dormant conflict of the phony war is reflected in the activity of the novel's main characters. Earnest would-be soldier Alistair Trumpington finds himself engaged in incomprehensible manoeuvres instead of real combat, while Waugh's recurring ne'er-do-well Basil Seal first encounters as the Empress Seth's advisor in Black Mischief finds ample opportunity for amusing himself in the name of the war effort. Other British novels published in 1942 include Frenchman's Creek, which is a 1941 historical novel by Daphne du Maurier, and Pied Piper by Neville Shute, author of the more famous On the Beach and A Town Like Alice. Book number 4 was published in 1943. They Were Sisters by Dorothy Whipple. The main theme of They Were Sisters is that three sisters' choice of husband dictates whether they have homes and whether in their homes they will be allowed to flourish, be tamed or repressed. We see 3 different choices and 3 different husbands. The best friend, soulmate husband of the one sister who brings her great joy, the would-be companionable husband of another who overindulges and finally bores her, and the bullying husband who turns a high-spirited, naive young girl into a deeply unhappy woman. It is the late husband, Geoffrey, who is the most horrifying character in They Were Sisters. Man's cruelty to women is a frequent theme in Dorothy Whipple's novels, but nowhere was there more scope for man to be cruel to his wife than in Britain before the reform of the divorce laws. Middle-class women of this time had almost no choice of freeing herself from a bad husband due to their financial dependence. Even after the Matrimonial Causes Act of 1937, a divorced woman suffered grave social disadvantages. What has not changed is that some men are bullies and some women are married to them. Described as a woman who loves too much decades before those words became the title of a book about women drawn to dysfunctional partners, Charlotte marries Geoffrey, a boorish, hard-drinking salesman who swiftly evolves into a domestic dictator. Yet his blood-curdling sadism towards his wife and children is evoked without any physical violence or the use of a word stronger than damn. They Were Sisters is a compulsively readable but often harrowing novel. Other British novels published in 1943 include The Ministry of Fear by Graham Greene, The Last of Summer by Kate O'Brien, The Small Back Room by Nigel Belkin, and Perelandra, also titled Voyage to Venus, in a later edition published by Pan Books, and it is the second book in the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis. Book number 5 was published in 1944. The Razor's Edge is a novel by W. Somerset Maugham. It tells the story of Larry Darrell, an American pilot traumatized by his experiences in World War I, who sets off in search of some transcendent meaning in his life. The story begins through the eyes of Larry's friends and acquaintances as they witness his personality change after the war. His rejection of conventional life and search for meaningful experience allows him to thrive, while the more materialistic characters suffer reversals of fortune. The book was twice adapted into film, first in 1946 starring Tyrone Power and Gene Tierney, and Herbert Marshall as Maugham and Anne Baxter as Sophie, and then a 1984 adaptation starring Bill Murray. The novel's title comes from a translation of a verse in the Katha Upanishad, paraphrased in the book's epigraph as "the sharp edge of a razor is difficult to pass over. Thus, the wise say the path to salvation is hard." Other British novels published in 1944 include Fair Stood the Wind for France by H.E. Bates, who is better known for The Darling Buds of May, the first novel in his 5-book series called The Pop Larkin Chronicles. The Horse's Mouth by Anglo-Irish writer Joyce Carey, The Green Years by A.J. Cronin, and The Shrimp and the Anemone by L.P. Hartley, who is better known for The Go-Between. Book number 6 was published in 1945. Loving by Henry Green. One of his most admired works, Loving describes life above and below stairs in an Irish country house during the Second World War. In the absence of their employers, the tenants, the servants, enact their own battles and conflict amid rumours about the war in Europe, invading one another's provinces of authority to create an anarchic environment of self-seeking behaviour, pilfering, gossip and love. In a 1958 interview in the Paris Review, Terry Southern asked Green about his inspiration for Loving. Green replied, "I got the idea of Loving from a manservant in the fire service during the war. He was serving with me in the ranks, and he told me he had once asked the elderly butler who was over him what the old boy most liked in the world. The reply was, lying in bed on a summer morning with the window open, listening to the church bells, eating buttered toast. I saw the book in a flash." Other British novels published in 1945 include Sparkling Cyanide by Agatha Christie, The Commodore by Horatio Hornblower, a novel by C.S. Forester. The Commodore is a Horatio Hornblower novel by C.S. Forester, is what I meant to say. The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, and Animal Farm, an allegorical novella by George Orwell. Book number 7 was published in 1946. The Moving Toyshop is a work of detective fiction by Edmund Crispin, featuring his recurrent sleuth Gervais Fenn, an Oxford professor of English language and literature. Famous poet Richard Cadogan takes an impromptu holiday to Oxford, where he studies at the university, after growing bored with the literary life in the suburbs. After finding himself in a high street in the middle of the night and with no place to stay, he stumbles across a shop with its awning still up. Closer inspection reveals it to be a toy shop, and on finding the door unlocked, curiosity leads Cadogan inside, then up a flight of stairs to a flat where he finds the murdered body of an elderly woman before being knocked unconscious. He wakes up the next morning in a supply closet, but after escaping and bringing back the police, the toy shop is no longer there, replaced, it seems, with a grocer's shop. Bewildered, Cadogan turns to an old friend at Oxford University, eccentric professor and amateur sleuth Gervase Fenn, to help him solve the mystery of the moving toy shop. To find out what the mystery is, you'll have to read the story. Other British novels published in 1946 include The Hollow by Agatha Christie. Then and Now is a historical novel by W. Somerset Maugham. Titus Groan by Mervyn Peake. Jill is a novel by English poet Philip Larkin, which he wrote when he was 21 years old and an undergraduate at St John's College, Oxford. Book number 8 was published in 1947, Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry. The novel tells the story of Geoffrey Firmin, an alcoholic British consul in a small Mexican town on the Day of the Dead, the 2nd of November 1938. The book takes its name from the 2 volcanoes that overshadow the town. The book consists of 12 chapters, the first of which introduces the narrative proper, and which is set exactly a year after the events. The following 11 chapters happen in a single day and follow the consul chronologically, starting early in the morning of the Day of the Dead, with the return of his wife Yvonne, who left him the year before, to his violent death at the end of the day. Each chapter is seen through the mind of one central figure, no 2 sequential chapters employing the same character's consciousness. The number of chapters was important numerologically, as Larry explained in a letter to Jonathan Cape. There are 12 hours in a day, and most of the novel happens in a single day. 12 months in a year, 1 year elapses between chapter 1 and the end of chapter 12. Besides, the number 12 is of symbolic importance, which, according to Lowry, represents man's spiritual aspirations. So there you are. Now you know. Other British novels published in 1947 include Forlorn Sunset by Michael Sadlier and Tea with Mrs. Goodman by Philip Toynbee. Book number 9 was published in 1948. Love Lies Bleeding is a detective novel by Edmund Crispin, first published in 1948. Set in the post-war period in and around a public school in the vicinity of Stratford-upon-Avon, it is about the accidental discovery of old manuscripts which contain Shakespeare's long-lost play Love's Labour's Won, and the subsequent hunt for those manuscripts, in the course of which several people are murdered. Collaborating with the local police, Oxford Don Gervase Fenn, a professor of English who happens to be the guest of honour at the school's speech day, can solve the case at the same weekend. Other British novels published in 1948 include The Heat of the Day by Elizabeth Bowen, The Heart of the Matter by Graham Greene, Catalina by W. Somerset Maugham, and I Captured the Castle, which is the first novel by Dodie Smith. Book number 10 was published in 1949. Love in a Cold Climate by Nancy Mitford. In Love in a Cold Climate, the narrator, Fanny, tells the story of Polly, to whom Fanny is distantly related through her father's family. Lady Leopoldina Polly Hampton is the only child of the supremely aristocratic and very rich Earl of Montdor and his wife Sonia. Lady Montdor, Polly's mother, is depicted by Fanny as an avaricious, greedy snob, but not without charm. Her thrusting personality, allied to her husband's impeccable social standing, riches and political influence, makes her a formidable woman. Fanny receives an invitation to visit the Montdors. She has great affection for Polly, but Polly reveals little of herself. Polly has come out as a beautiful and socially important debutante and is expected to have a very successful season in London. However, Polly consistently demonstrates a total lack of interest in the London season and all of the men she meets. She's hoping that in a cold climate society will be less interested in love affairs. Lady Montdor is exasperated by her daughter's apparent indifference to love and marriage. Important potential suitors acknowledge that Polly is very beautiful, but find her cold and aloof. But Polly has a secret love. To find out who it is, you'll have to read the novel. Other British novels published in 1949 include 1984 by George Orwell and The Third Man by Graham Greene. In part 6 of this series I will discuss books by British authors published in the decade from 1950 to 1959. So that's all folks, but I'll be back soon with another Booktube video.